Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and I've got Peter Jones back to the channel. How are you, Pete?
Mr. Kerr, pleasure. Nice to see you, and I'm looking forward to another great discussion.
Absolutely. Today's discussion, we are going to talk about Ronnie James Dio, or the Dio Band, and the fourth album from 1987, Dream Evil. So this was a substantial change for the band. Vivian Campbell out, Craig Goldie in. Last album with Jimmy Bain. And yeah, it was really basically a changing of the guard. The fortunes of Ronnie James Dio had changed. So what we'll do, as always, with these album discussions, we'll talk about our first impressions of the album in the day, do a track-by-track analysis, and then have a bit of a yarn about our thoughts about this album in 2024, and maybe a few little what-if questions at the end, as we usually do, go on tangents. So, Pete, what was your recollection of hearing this album in 1987?
Well, huge fan. Ronnie is seminal in my whole music life. Anybody who's ever watched anything I've been on, that's no surprise whatsoever. I was waiting for this when it came out, got it pretty close to the release date, and enjoyed it. I liked it a lot at first, played through it a million times, and had a real good experience with it. It was a bit different. You can tell that there are changes. I had seen the Sacred Heart tour, the second leg in the US, and that was with Craig. The first leg went through with Vivian, and I did not see that. And was a huge fan of that tour. I found it to just be really, really great live. Of course, they've always been a really good band live, and the members of the band, Vinny is one of my biggest drum heroes. Absolutely love him. So yeah, I was excited. I thought the album cover was kind of cool looking, and but there's a lot of things that happened. Like you said, it's not just the last album with Jimmy. Jimmy wouldn't show up again until what, 2000 in Magica. It's the last album with Murray, our our monster friend. He doesn't show up again, which I think is a mistake, marketing wise. And this is the last album with Vinny Appice until Strange Highways. And it's also the last album for keyboardist Claude Schnell. So there's just a lot going on here. And I didn't see this tour. And then I saw the following tour again, which is a whole new set of changes. So this album is kind of sitting a little bit isolated amongst what was going on prior through the three albums with Vivian and the large amount of changes that start happening with this and then subsequently after it. But yeah, my memories are good of it, and I enjoyed it and played it quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, I saw the second leg of the Sacred Heart tour. Australia was kind of starved of heavy metal in the 80s, but we did see the Sacred Heart tour with Craig Goldie, and that was a great night. What a performance. And, first time seeing Ronnie James Dio. And I actually went to a music show that morning where he was live in the studio being interviewed, and met him after the show, got him to sign a couple of albums, and just the nicest guy. I tell you what, he had the biggest bodyguard I've ever seen. He was like he was like the Rock. But as a teenager, it was just wonderful being up close with Ronnie, and he was so fan friendly.
Yeah, I had met Vinny Appice, during the Sacred Heart era. He did a drum clinic in the Chicago area. And I sat in the front row, which was a huge mistake because his bass drum was aimed right at my chest. I thought I was going to be defibrillated into some cardiac issue. But it was pretty glorious when I think about it after the fact. But another really humble and just
Yeah.
really down. I've met him a couple times more since, and I met Carmine as well. But they were kind of in a much higher place. They were about ready to do the Donington, and so it was kind of a cool thing. So, anyways,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
they're a really nice guy, great player, obviously.
Absolutely. And my first encounter with the album, like yourself, I got this sort of like I think this is an import version, and it's got the
Oh yeah.
the lyrics, and I got this
Mhm.
straight away off Utopia Records, and I enjoyed it. I actually thought my initial impression, and we'll talk about that as we get deeper into the show, was it was a step up from Sacred Heart. Maybe not as good as Last in Line or Holy Diver, but it was definitely an improvement over Sacred Heart, which I had some issues with. But all right, so just a little bit of quick admin as we always do.
Right.
Fourth album with Dio hit the top 10 in UK, number 8. In the US, it was number 43, which was a bit of a step down. And I've got no record that it was accredited of reaching gold status. So I'm not sure if it was recertified. It might have crawled up there, but I don't think it's likely. So
No.
this was I think Sacred Heart was the last album that reached a gold status or platinum, and this one
Right.
didn't. So it was definitely a bit of a step off with the commercial fortunes. So why don't we do a song analysis? We'll go song by song. Pete, the first song on the album is very vibrant, like a lot of the opening tracks with Dio, and it's Night People. What do you think of this song?
Just a quick side note, I think too, it's important to point out to our viewers that it wasn't just this straight transition from Sacred Heart to Dream Evil. There was some period that went through there, and in trying to appease, the public, Intermission came
The
out.
EP, yes.
Yeah, and there were a lot of Dio fans, especially in myself, who were clamoring for at least a double live album from Dio with Vivian that really would have been a tremendous thing. But we didn't get it. And Intermission is really hard to find now. And, it had the one track, Time to Burn, on it that they were trying to say, okay, here's kind of where we're going with it. But
Mm,
so there was a little bit of a longer break than probably there would have been if they'd have just gone straight from Sacred Heart into it. And we've talked about it before. The passing of time can be a bad thing. You get out of people's minds, you think about other bands come up, and you start to lose focus. And then you're like, oh, Dio's got a new album. So that is part of what's going on here. I will start saying from the very first that one of the issues I have with this album is a sonic inconsistency from one track to the next. The drums sound very different from track to track. Um, there is a sense of muddy, over the top dampening. It's not very open. It doesn't breathe very well, which makes it sound kind of compressed and a little bit small sonically. While I believe songs as a collective on this album are stronger than Sacred Heart, I prefer the sound of Sacred Heart over this. We get to the track, and the first thing we hear is maybe something that is kind of a signal of where we're going here. We don't hear guitar, we don't hear drums, we don't hear Ronnie, we hear keyboards. And that's kind of a new thing. And you talked about openers. I think, as we're going chronological, I think this is the weakest opener of their albums to date at this point. Stand Up and Shout, We Rock, and King of Rock and Roll, I think, are substantially more complete and aggressive and stronger songs than this. And so from that standpoint, it was starting right off the bat to make me feel a little bit off. It's a good tempo, it's driving, Craig's playing is very good, but I don't really care for his guitar tone. I think it's a bit scratchy, and it doesn't seem to have the depth that I was looking for or hoping for on the record. Live, it was fine, and which is one of the things that kind of threw me when we got to the record, because I was anticipating more of the tonality that I heard from him on live stuff that wasn't translating here. But it's a straightforward rock Dio track. It's Ronnie's themes. Do you like the dark? Do you like the way it moves? Do you come alive when neon kills the sun? No one else is going to sing that line except Ronnie.
And he gets away with it.
Yes, he does. And Jimmy Bain's bass playing on this is very strong. It's aggressive. There are moments when the sonics are a little bit different that he's much easier to hear. But he does have an aggressiveness to it. It's just the chorus, and if you can't even really call it a chorus, it's Night People. He says it once and then back into a riff, back into the verses. It's a interesting song structure from that standpoint. It gets to a solo, and I think the solo is fine. Let's just say it. He's not Vivian Campbell. They played totally differently. So to say one is one and one isn't the other, we go through that with Blackmore. We've done it with a lot of other things that we've done together, Peter. He's a good, competent player. He knows what he's doing, and he's got good phrasing, and he's got good chops, good technique. So I think it works. The first thing that also kind of stood out to me is how reserved Vinny Appice is here. If you listen to the earlier albums, and we're only one song in, I understand that, but he has a reputation in Dio of playing over the melody line, doing fills while Ronnie is singing. That's kind of his trademark. And those are not here. It's just break, simple fill, back into it. And I'm like, where are all your fills? Where is this, this machine gun like firing off that Vinny is known for, especially in Dio? So that was throwing me a bit. And I noticed that very early on when I was listening to this way back in the day, that this was different because I was playing along with these right off the bat when I got them and learning them and going, oh, there really isn't any big seminal fill like the beginning of Stand Up and Shout or We Rock or the opening of King of Rock and Roll. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's different. It's a good song. There's more keyboards than we're used to. Ronnie sounds great. Ronnie is always great. So let's just throw a blanket over the whole record. Ronnie's vocals are awesome.
Yes.
And there's nothing in here that's going to make me think otherwise, whether he's singing or what he's singing about or the melodies are good or not so good. Ronnie is a master, and it's an appropriate feel. It's an appropriate tempo, and it's a good opener. But I do have some reservations about it as in comparison to the other records and how this record started. So.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Pete. I've got a completely different view. I'm not really I don't feel as strongly about the production as you do, but it's probably because I love the songs and the arrangements and the songwriting, and that may overcompensate it, but it's not as noticeable to me than comparative to other albums where the production really irritates me, and that does affect my enjoyment. So this song starts off with these really harsh synth stabs of Claude Schnell. And Claude Schnell's a kind of a valuable player. There's a lot of keyboard padding, a lot of melancholy keyboard washes. He's sort of like a pseudo rhythm guitar and, filling out the sonics. And we'll get into that as we go deeper into the album. Craig Goldie's guitar playing has got a lot of bite. He plays with a lot of confidence. you can tell he is his own person. He is not an imitation of Viv. It's like, here I am, this is my style. And I think he's, plays a really tasty riff on this album. So this song is very similar to, the King of Rock and Roll, Evil Eyes. It's kind of got a bit of a Rainbow Deep Purple influence. I think it's a fine opener. Maybe it's not as strong as those others that I've just cited, but to me, it invites the listener into this album that it is a different sounding album. This is a different band. I think it's fine. I haven't really got much more to say. And look, Ronnie's vocals on this album, I think this is some of the best vocals that he's sung on Dio. There's a lot of passion, and there's a lot that was going in Ronnie's life. A lot of it was, he lost his guitarist. His wife had left him. I think the period with Sacred Heart to 1987 with this album, where the band was basically competing with a lot of other bands. I don't think it was a very happy period for Ronnie. And there's a lot of melancholy, there's a lot of sadness, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration in this album, and it all comes out in his voice. What a voice, Pete. He wears his heart on his sleeve, and you can hear all the emotion. He is not a contrived singer. He can't pretend emotion. Emotion just comes out of it. And whether you like these songs or not, Pete, his vocals, they're just full of emotion, aren't they?
Well, and that can carry the day almost single-handedly.
Yes.
Ronnie can sing something, and I can't imagine that I wouldn't care for it, but he could, and you'd be like, oh, well, but it's really well done, and it's really well delivered, and so you start to nitpick, more on the things around him. You're certainly not, because most of the time with other records, we're talking maybe more so exclusively about how the singer is this, or how the singer delivered or didn't deliver. Here, that's just a given that Ronnie is going to be great. And he is.
But I think he was hurt. And there's a lot of hurt in this album. And I felt that. And that'll come out as we go into more of the lyrics and some of the deeper tracks. So let's go to the second one, Dream Evil. What do you think of this song?
Well, I think sonically, this is obviously you need two things to compare. So as soon as this track opened and I heard the drum punches in that intro and Vinny's first drum fill into the intro, I go, this sounds like Dio. This has the sonics. The drums are more resonant. They're more open. There's more low end. They punch more. Craig's rhythm sound is a bit thicker. And I really like how this really, really sounds here. The whole mix, the mastering on this just sounds like it was done at a different time, either at a different location or something. They don't sound like they're from the same sessions. But the bass is great. They get to this cool, wonderful Vinny fill into the super tight verses. And Ronnie's singing right over this is classic Dio.
Yep.
And, all's well at the midnight hour. You're ready to fly. Yeah, and you are. And you were talking about, emotionally, you say some things that just could never be are calling up a spell so you can see. Well, that's not optimistic. That's not.
No.
That's not upbeat. That's like, sorry, some things are just, don't go to the edge of rainbows. Don't close your eyes. Like things that can't be real. The truth is really lies. Well, that contrarian back and forth that he's done for his whole career.
Heaven and
black,
hell.
white, is it heaven and hell? Is it what is it?
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful, more complete chorus. Dream evil, the dark that you find in the back of your mind. And Vinny is really thundering away underneath. Is much busier, doing more fills. His bass drum is much more active. And by the time we get to the second verse, it's just really driving now. And the solo section is really, really good. Partly because Craig's solo is really great, but listen to the accompaniment. Vinny is much busier and the bass is much busier, and it sounds like those solo sections from Stand Up and We Rock and those tracks, and it just fits more appropriately. I love how it breaks down back to the verses at the end, and you get that Dream Evil,
the demonic voice,
back in. That's Ronnie does that. That's what he does, and it works from him because there's a certain sincerity to it that could come off cheesy with somebody else, but it doesn't. And I said this, like I said at the beginning, this sounds like Dio, and this is the kind of track I was hoping for on this, and I think it's an exceptionally strong song, and live it was a powerhouse. So
yeah, I would have loved to have seen that live. Pete, I think there's so much tension in this song. The arrangements are watertight. There's yin and yang. It really combines to make it a really, and I say this as a compliment, an oppressive type of song. It just really thunders away. There's just so much tension. It's epic. It's got grandeur. And again, I keep on coming to Claude Schnell. I'm going to boost his stocks a little bit. You can hear just the keyboard padding. It adds a lot of atmosphere that maybe the other albums, needed a little bit more. But, it adds a lot of atmosphere to this song. I think this is a signature song. You saw this live, Dream Evil. Did they pad it out? Or did it
no, I heard it.
Oh,
no,
okay.
I'd heard this on the Donington.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, I did not see this live.
Yep. All right, so Dream Evil, that's the second song. Sunset Superman. What do you think about this one? A bit of a different sounding song to the typical Dio.
This one's, and I don't want to sound disparaging here. I said this is kind of more of a poor man's Holy Diver intro. I don't think it's as fully formed or as dramatic as what the keys were at the intro to Holy Diver. That builds tension, and I'm not sure really why this was there, but this instantly, when the drums come back in, sounds much more similar to Night People than it did to Dream Evil sonically. I think the drums, especially the snare drum and the cymbals, sound very muted. And that kind of, there's no headroom. The cymbals sound cut off and kind of restrained and restricted. And that can impact how it feels and how it, especially to drummer, obviously. But it's a driving verse. The night of 1,000 eyes, but he moves in only places where the eyes can never be. These are typical Ronnie lyrics. And you get to the chorus and you kind of have that, it's not a shout chorus because Ronnie never shouts, but it's a punchy boom, boom, gra, boom, boom, gra, Sunset Superman, it's We Will Rock You.
We will.
Yeah, but that's it. There's no other embellishments to it. He says Sunset Superman, and then they change the feel, go back to the verse with the more up tempo, repeat the chorus again, and then they get to this long breakdown section where the drums are just boom, boom, gra, boom, boom, gra, and Craig kind of goes off on his own little guitar, embellishments and aria, if you will. I think it goes too long, and it really kind of kills the momentum of the track. And there isn't anything that bridges well between that and then to jump right back into a verse. I would have loved a connector in there somewhere to bring it back to that point. Jimmy Bain sounds great on this one. His bass is thumping and thundering away, and I wish I could have heard his bass that loud on Rising.
I think it's his best bass playing in Dio.
Yeah.
In the mix, for all the flaws that you've identified, I think they've got
Oh, yeah.
his bass spot on.
It does. And you notice it. And you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, good on for you, Jimmy, because it sounds great. And we get to the ending of this, and I had to do it. He says Sunset Superman 28 times.
Right.
That's that's just too many. It just went on and on and on and on. And I'm going, mm-mm. That compositionally does not work for me.
Yeah.
And, I've certainly slogged Maiden over the years for these repetitive choruses that just keep going on ad nauseum. And I thought that was a failure of composition right there. It just went too long.
Yeah, I disagree. I like this song a lot. And again, I think lyrically, this is a very dark and sad song because the lyrics are about where we have dreams at night, where we can be something else, like a superhero. And we wake up to reality, screaming, and we're mortal. And I think it's like a metaphor for Ronnie that he, of a better time, you know, dreaming of where he would like to be somewhere else and in a better place. I don't think he was in a very good place. So there's a lot of aspirational kind of lyrics in this album where of something better and dreaming of something better. And, and he brings it back to reality that things are kind of dark and, a little bit evil and, I think he's relating to his own personal situation. So I don't think it's a very happy song. Yeah, I agree. It could be trimmed a little bit, but it's got that sort of, I think it's a crowd participation song. I think it was written in mind that when they're playing Donington or the concert tour, this will be one where, okay, come on, crowd, left-hand side. Sunset, right. Where that cliche of metal concerts where they divide the invisible wall between half the crowd and who's louder. Oh, you guys win. I think it was definitely there was a crowd participation side to this song.
Well, I think the lyric that really, really hones in on what you're saying, Peter, is, and he repeats it at the end of each verse, trying to hide your burning heart before somebody cuts it all away.
Yeah. I think it's almost like a letter to Wendy. So he's wearing his heart on his sleeve, and it gets a big tick from me because out of great adversity and pain and sadness can be great art. And, all the other quibbles aside, vocally, his emotions are just pouring out of this album, and I think that's a huge plus. I like Craig Goldie. He's a lot of the riffs are really cutting. He sounds like a very confident player. So I'm just reiterating what I said, that I think he's very comfortable in his own skin. This is my style, so he's slotting in. Yeah, look, I think it's a fine album. One thing I want to talk about this album, Pete, is the tempos are very much picked up comparative to Sacred Heart, which was a little bit more plotty, a little bit, I wouldn't call it dinosaur, but it was very doomy. And do you think it was a deliberate move by the band and maybe Craig Goldie's influence that, come on, Ronnie, let's pick up the tempos? Because what was happening in 1987, Metallica, speed metal, the traditional metal, because these guys were never part of the hair metal scene.
No.
The power, the traditional metal bands had to compete with these new blood metal bands like your Megadeths, your Metallicas, Slayers, which are quite, speed metal. They're up tempo. Do you think there was a concerted, deliberate sort of, they had to change the tempos to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak?
It's always interesting who's the chicken and who's the egg. There is a phase, and I do think that it starts here to some degree. And I think it is challenged more on Lock Up the Wolves, but then clearly comes full circle on Strange Highways, that Ronnie is becoming much more sluggish much more plotty, much more heavy, much more doomy. At least from a instrumentation and instrument and tempo standpoint. There are lots of moments on here that can tend to be a little more um, mid to lower mid, but as we go through the rest of the tracks, there's other ones that pick it up and
Mm.
do try to bring a little more um, aggression and speed to it. Do I think he was influenced? I have to say that if you think he wasn't, it might be naive.
Mm.
You also, all you have to do is look at what the band looked like on this tour. Ronnie's hair is puffed up. He's wearing purples. He's got fringes. He's got, a lot of stuff. This was not the same look as Last in Line and Holy Diver. This was, I don't know, he used the word with Ronnie, it was glammy.
Mm.
This had a glammy look to it. Craig's hair was huge and puffy, not the sweaty, matted down Vivian Campbell hair.
Yeah.
His was kind of curly, but, certainly you wouldn't get caught up in it and glam. I've got posters of them. They look like none of them showered for a month. But it is a change of visual. It is the stage was brighter. So there has to be some influence. He knows what the public is doing, and he's trying to still be himself, but still be relevant. And that is a hard challenge. If maybe your natural tendency, maybe just not be the flavor du jour of what's being served to the public that they're willing to consume.
Well,
That's
he
a
wouldn't have been the
long-winded
only
answer.
one. He wasn't the only one, Pete. Like Rob Halford, I'm talking to you, Turbo.
Oh, absolutely.
Just look at that. So,
yeah, the influences matter.
yeah. Whitesnake, David Coverdale was like middle aged, and without that image, I'm not sure whether he would have sold as many. But that's another show.
Right. Sure.
All right. The next song was actually a single, All the Fools Sailed Away. What do you think of this one?
This is the epic on the album. It's a little over 7 minutes. If you listen to an artist long enough, you'll start to see trends and hear trends. We see it with Purple. We see it with everything, where they kind of start to take a formula from earlier songs. And this one, to me, kind of has a Children of the Sea kind of structure to it. They're different songs. I'm not saying they're comparable music-wise. Structure-wise, I do think they are. We get a softer, gentle intro with Ronnie with a very delicate voice, not unlike Children of the Sea. And then it breaks into a very meticulously poundy rhythm pattern. And it's not too far tempo-wise from where Children of the Sea is. The rhythmic focus is different, but they're pretty close. And it's a grinding riff. Vinny's thundering. Of course, nobody plays slow and heavy better than Vinny Appice. He's the master at it. Bill Ward was the teacher. And of course, Vinny took it to a whole new level. But the guitars are thick. They're heavy. Ronnie's biting over the top of it. It sounds great. The choruses are very melodic. But again, just very simple. They just repeat the title, not unlike Sunset Superman, just all the fools sailed away, all the fools sailed away. We get to the second, and now it starts to get embellished a bit because Claude's adding a little bit of keyboards underneath to give it a little bit of advanced texture. I think they sound a bit dated, more so because the types of sounds that Claude would use, they do sound like 80s keyboards.
I agree.
Unlike a Hammond, which is just going to sound good. I don't care when you do it. That wasn't Ronnie's thing. There were no Hammonds in Dio. But the keyboards do sound a bit dated. and it says Ronnie's amazing here. His voice is strong. It's they get this great breakdown again, back to as we drift along. I never fail to be astounded by the things we'll do for promises and a song. Now, someone could be cynical and say, "Hey, Ronnie, I thought you said you don't do love songs." Well, he's not. He's not an uncaring, not unfeeling human being. And like you said over and over, his life's got a lot of stuff going on in it. And all good artists, like you said, pain and sorrow and conflict makes for good music. And so
Yeah.
out it comes. And then they get to this big, heavy, full kind of a mood change. And we've got a keyboard solo. I would have never expected to get a keyboard solo. And I'm like, wow, that's different. Do I like it? I still don't know all these years later if I like it or not. It always comes in and I'm just going, okay, it's a keyboard solo. Clearly he's a very technically gifted player. But that sound of the patches and keyboards he's using just kind of doesn't work for me. The you get in this, I guess, is where you listen, where you can hear that the cymbals are choking off. They're not sustaining and they're not giving it that breath that I'm looking for. And then when Ronnie comes back in, we are the innocent, we cut, we bleed. That is very intense. We're your one great chance for a miracle, and a miracle is something you need. They'll take your diamonds, they'll give you steel. There's a lot going on in these lyrics here amongst this, but if this was a faster, more up-tempo song, these lyrics wouldn't be as poignant. You've got to have room for the listener to be able to digest what it is he's saying. And if he goes too quick, the lyrics lose their power. Yeah. And so from a speed standpoint, they're perfect for what he's trying to say, because you got to be able to digest it. It's a very strong track. The live recordings of this, especially Donington, are very impactful. And it's a very thick and aggressive and powerful song. And so, yeah, I like it.
Well, for the album to have this as the signature lyrics, that's the signature song. He's chosen, that's the song that I want to highlight.
Right.
And do you like the choir? I think it adds a lot of grandeur to the song.
Yeah.
Sort of, the sonics.
I remember seeing the video. I remember seeing the video the first time, and we can talk about it on another show about how successful or unsuccessful Ronnie's concept videos were. Rock and Roll Children and other videos
We Rock
like
Last Line.
Yeah, I mean, at least that one was kind of playful. This one, I really just wasn't sure what they were trying to do, and it really didn't help the song. So I just try and purge that out from my memory. But it's an epic. But they chose to do a video on a 7-minute song. So,
Pete, Ronnie's got a great ear for melody, doesn't he? So is it your understanding that Goldie would come up with a riff and then Ronnie would refine it and put a vocal line, and then they would just work between both of them, and they would nail it? Is that the process?
Yeah, and I think one of the things we have to talk about is that there's not only tension in Ronnie's personal life, there's tension in the band, because Vinny and Jimmy are not happy. Money, and a lot of that has come out much later in the career, much more recently in their lives, as to what may or may not have actually was promised and what was delivered. Neither of them were happy about the change to add more keyboards to the playing style, and they didn't like it. And subsequently, they were gone.
Mm.
So you feel that tension, and it comes across because microphones don't lie. They pick up everything. And you say, well, come on, Pete, he's a drum. Drums don't have emotion. Bullshit, they don't.
Yes.
Yeah, they do.
Mm.
Everything anybody plays has emotion to it.
Yeah.
And you can tell that at moments where Vinny doesn't do a lot, other moments, maybe he likes the song and there's less keyboards, he plays busier. And
Mm.
so there's a lot going on here.
I think this band's on tenterhooks, and to me, it comes out as great art. Look, this song has got grandeur. It's got a wonderful Dio vocal line. I like the lyrics. I think the lyrics speak to religion and the blindness of some religion's followers, and that was a common recurring theme with Dio. Goldie plays a great lead and rhythm, and it has a lot of bite, and you can feel that his guitar playing has emotion. He's not being a root type of guitarist. He's playing it and he's feeling it.
Right.
I agree with the Schnell keyboard. There's some dinky, twinkly little keyboard lines, and even the great master like John Lord on the House of the Blue Light went down. Oh, we've got the latest Juno synthesizer. We should try some modern sound effects. Wrong.
Just kind of tinkly and just kind of irritating.
Yeah, we could have a trivia contest and just close our eyes and just listen and go, oh, that sounds like 1984. Just carbon dates it to a particular era.
Right, it does.
So Schnell, for most part, except this song, is really good. And I actually, as a young, precocious fan, asked Ronnie, what's the deal with Claude Schnell, Ronnie? And he goes, the thing I like about, and I remember his words, he says, the thing I like about Claude, he knows his place. It's like, I'm the boss, and you listen to what I have to say.
Yeah.
I remember those words.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that goes a long way.
Yeah. Bottom end. I like the bottom end of Bane and Apathy. They anchor the song. They push it along. What a great combination they were.
Oh, they were great together.
Yeah.
Special.
So I like it. It's a signature song. So that's the single. And it just didn't do anything, really. It didn't really damage the charts in any shape or form. Right. So the next song is Naked in the Rain. What do you think of this song?
Another great, chunky intro. And again, another medium to slower driving tempo. This one's not a race to anywhere. And this is that kind of very familiar Vinny, Appice, Dio Sabbath, Holy Diver, Heaven and Hell. That's if you were to say there's a signature rhythm for Dio or that era, it's that. And, I think it's a cool riff. And I like when they get to the verse and they start, it's just simple underneath. It's just chugging and chunking. And then you get to a little more keys. So they start without the keys, add some keys, the chorus. And then Ronnie does something he's often done. He does it on Holy Diver. He's done it on a lot of other stuff. He adds his harmonies to the verse. Takes it up a step, in as far as impact and instrumentation by adding the second voice. Part of my favorite part of it is kind of what I would kind of call it, it's the tail of the verse. It was almost like a tiny little pre-chorus. Are we just crazy with the pain, or do we see just what we are? We're naked in the it's got a really cool driving feel to it. You get to the solo section, and this is very Dio-like. It's got broken up rhythmic parts underneath. Again, I keep going back to Holy Diver. It's got that kind of feel to it, and it's familiar. It's comfortable, it's recognizable, and it works for this track. And they go back in verse, and then we get to some really big more fills from Vinny. I think it's a strong song.
Mm.
It doesn't seem like 5 minutes. I was surprised when I wrote the numbers down that it was five. It doesn't seem that long, which is kind of a good sign. I mean, you certainly don't want it to feel like it should have been over. Um, but again, it's another one of those staples of that era that was done live that Vinny just lays such a foundation with Jimmy that Ronnie's just crushing over the top of it, and Craig's doing his part to just fill in with very minimalistic for the most part. It's not riffy. It's just chuggy and chunky. There's not a lot of lines or melodic riffs that are happening in this album. They're chordal, they're ensemble based. You're not running lines. That's not what was happening here. And it just creates this kind of collective sonic impact underneath Ronnie's vocals that are just kind of foundational. And for these tracks, it works because Ronnie's what we're listening to for the most part anyway. So it works. So
Look, this album is so melancholy, and a lot of the songs are in the minor key, and they do these little subtle key changes, and it's kind of devastating. I think this is the saddest Ronnie James Dio song. I mean, he's talking about his vulnerability, like we're all naked in the rain. There's so much sadness. There's a lot of sadness on this album, and I was getting kind of emotional thinking about it because I miss this guy. And, the documentary really reinforced what a powerhouse he was. Obviously, you've seen the documentary, Pete.
Yep.
It's for the fans. It's kind of an emotional sort of piece of movie making, just to see, all the things that Ronnie, the adversity, like this guy's career goes back to the beginning, the genesis of rock and roll, and all the adversity that he had to go through, to claw his way up. And when it's really strange to tell the folks in 2024, but in the 1980s, there were a lot of pop stars or hard rock or rock and roll stars that had a second career, and they were in their middle age.
Right.
Have a look in the 80s of how many folk in the middle age were getting success. Tina Turner, Steve Winwood, David Coverdale. Ronnie James Dio was like
David Bowie.
David Bowie.
Yeah.
He was in his late 40s. And I think heavy metal kind of embraced that. It didn't matter if he was age or what he looked like. It was the music, and the music is number one, and that's what the fans appreciated. And I just think everything about Ronnie's struggle to get where he was is encapsulated in that song. I think it's one of the best songs on the album, and there's just so much melancholy and sadness. Does that, do you feel that way in some of Ronnie's songs, that they really tug the heartstrings beyond the thunder and the arrangements and the guitar solos? There's a real emotional part.
My fear is this, that for a lot of people who may listen to Ronnie or know about Ronnie, may not even get to the point where they are digesting what he is saying, because he's not singing. And I'm not going to, look, if you like Poison, you like Poison. It's just, ain't nothing but a good time. That doesn't take a lot of thought to connect to. It's just what it is. It's, it's much more accessible without any real effort from the listener. I think Ronnie has always demanded some type of responsibility from his listeners to dig a little deeper, to think a little more outside of the box. We've always said, and I said it earlier, he's like, well, I don't write relationship and love songs. I don't want to do that. When he was talking about Blackmore with Rainbow, I don't want to do that. Well, clearly he gets the right to change his mind. Obviously, Bruce said you can't use keyboards in heavy metal. Whoops. Whoops. But the point is that Ronnie takes his music and the genre that he plays and that what he delivers very, very seriously. And we've talked about the conflicts. There's a third conflict. There's his personal life, there's the band life, and then there is the environment around him. What year are we talking about? What is all over the place? Everybody with hairspray, spandex, and lipstick.
The scene's changing, Pete.
Everything that Ronnie absolutely despised. He just didn't like it. He
Changing
thought it
the
was
guard.
He thought it was trite and cheap and didn't take any talent. And he was not anybody who would hold back. And, he would talk about American Idol and things like, he said, what? All of a sudden you win some contest and you're some rock star? He's like, where are your dues? Where is the struggle? How did you earn anything? No, people can say you're just a cynical old man and just, you're bitter. No, he's not bitter. He's an artist. And artists have feelings and emotions, and he sees everything around him going away. Everything. Now he's trying to put a band together with a new guitarist, with a rhythm section that's totally unhappy, with record sales dropping, concert sales dropping. And it's got to be very, very difficult for somebody who takes it so to heart. Sometimes you can separate the artist from the person. I don't think that ever happened with Ronnie.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was always the artist.
Well, I can see a lot of relationships in these stories, these lyrics, and I think they're a little bit more accessible. Like a lot of his other lyrics, like in Sabbath, were kind of complex. It's your own interpretation, and they are contrary, black and white, heaven and hell. But this, you can sort of relate it more to, even though you've got the dream elements and they're aspirational of, how he would like things to be better. There's a lot of things in the present world, and they simply aren't shiny fine. There's a lot of darkness and there's a lot of sadness. And to me, I just think this is such an emotional song. It really is.
Yeah.
All right. The next one, Overlove. It's got a bit of a bluesy riff, this one, Pete. Do you like this one?
Yeah, this is the first one that opens with, Craig doing a rather complex segment of guitar parts here. It shows great technique. Big fill from Vinny into a very quick, powerful, driving up-tempo song. And Ronnie here is really kind of spitting the words out, and this is where you see how the lyrics are phrased differently. So build a wall, keep it all to yourself. That's stuff that you can understand when the words are going much quicker and the band is pushing quite heavily. It really sounds fast, especially in contrast to what we just heard from All the Fools and Naked in the Rain. This seems to have a really aggressive kind of propulsiveness to it. It's not unlike I Speed at Night or One Night, something like that was in the middle of, Last in Line, or it's kind of placed. He always does that. It's kind of like 2/3 of the way through. Here comes something really aggressive and something quick. Not much to the choruses, just over love. I mean, that's, and so what is he saying? Wrapped in chains. Oh, here. Always never seem to be too much. Reaching out becomes a spider's touch. Wrapped in chains, sad remains, another victim of overlove.
I think he's talking about himself, Pete, because even the title of the song is I'm over love. Like, he just wanted her, but she wants more. So build a wall, keep it all to herself. And then there's a lyric line, jealousy behind green eyes. I think he's talking about Wendy.
Yeah. Yeah. And turn the page, close the cage. When you use the word cage for relationships, that's
Yep.
pretty poignant. It's a driving song. Like I said, we get to the solo section and it's broken down a lot more like We Rock with the snare and bass drum driving the pattern underneath. It's not a straightforward rock beat or anything in it. And Vinny is just kind of thundering on here. It's one of his better performances on here. Solid musically. Um, uh, it's a good melody, not one of his better melodies as a sing-along or as to put the notes in order. But it works for the lyrics that he's trying to portray. So from that standpoint, I think it works top to bottom, and it's nice to get something a little more up tempo to kind of lift your spirits a bit, because it was getting a little bit maudlin and starting to
Yeah, a
drag
little
down
bit,
a bit.
very, very serious.
Yeah.
But I like it. It's a bit more playful,
Mhm.
with the guitar, and it's got that bluesy sort of feel to it. But the lyrics still have a lot of darkness and a lot of bite. So on one hand, you're thinking, oh, this is really bubbling along and it's playful. But you listen to the lyrics and you go, oh, ouch. He's in a bad spot. So I think, folks, you can see there's a theme all the way through this album. It ain't a happy album, is it, Pete?
Yeah.
All right, here's another what I call an aspirational type of song or lyric. I Could Have Been a Dreamer. I think this was the other single. Correct me if I'm wrong.
If I remember, yeah.
What do you think of this one?
Another simple guitar riff. This one has sonics similar to some of the earlier tracks, not as clean or transparent. And it's again a more mid-tempo. And the verses are very, very strong. Ronnie has a better melody here. I think it's much stronger, easier to get into. And if there's anybody who could sing, a song entitled "I Could Have Been a Dreamer," it's Ronnie. I mean, it's right up his alley, right? We take away tomorrow. We never see the end of today. Lock it up and send it away forever. I could have been a dreamer, could have been a shooting star, because dreams are what we are.
Yeah.
A little more optimistic, or could be more lamentive. I could have been a dreamer. What all of us have that, well, what ifs and those kinds of things. It's a little more accessible. I think this would fit right along with like a Invisible or a Gypsy or Caught in the Middle, or they're different. They're very different songs, but from that accessibility standpoint, it's not too heavy, it's not too poppy, it's not a slow kind of doomy epic. It sits in that middle section where it's a forceful enough moving tempo that you're into it. It just feels good. They laid down a really good foundation here. I think it's solid from top to bottom. Might not be one of my favorites in comparisons to the other tracks that we've gone over, but I certainly, it's not a skipper. I'm not even remotely going to go past it. But it is more Rainbow in the Dark stylish, where somebody who may not be a total Dio fan could hear it and go, yeah, it's a cool track.
Yeah. I think the payoff is in the chorus, and I think the chorus is much more interesting than the verse. It's one of those songs where the songs wrap around the chorus. I think it's a really catchy, but melancholy type of chorus. I think if this was a Broadway show, I can imagine the spotlight would be on him, and this would be kind of the showstopper where he's lamenting about the love that was lost, and running with the wolf pack, trying to, where he's describing how he's trying to be an individual. Maybe that's another analogy of the band in 1987. He's in the wolf pack, but previously, when it was Holy Diver, he was an individual,
right?
And he was a leader. Now he's running with the pack. So the word rainbow is used. So maybe I should have done a count of how many times he uses rainbow, but I don't mind that he uses.
The only Dio word that's missing in this one is fire.
or look out.
Or look out, right.
Look out. Yeah.
Right. If you say dreamer, rainbow, look out, or fire.
Yep.
You're okay.
I think it's a lament for what could have, should have, could have been. I think it's great, but the payoff is the chorus. That's the one. That's the hook that lingers with you after you finish the song. So, all right. The next one is Faces in the Window. Is this a filler track, or do you like it?
Oh, to answer your question directly, there's no filler involved whatsoever here. This is my favorite track on the album.
There you go.
This is spectacular. Fast, propulsive, heavy. Jimmy Bain is going nuts. Vinny, for everything that I said about how beautifully perfect he is on slow and heavy, he is just equally as brilliant at faster and heavy. Buddy up the rhythm, the feel, or the sonics of it. Where if it's something's fast, da 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 da, other drummers will go, they're playing heavy eighth notes or washing through it. No. Over on the ride cymbal, he's playing quarter notes. He's going da 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 da. His movement is in his foot. It's in his bass drum and snare. That's what's pushing it. The cymbal gets out of the way, and he's perfect at it. And only Vinny Appice does this. And it's one of his trademarks and signatures if you study him as much as I have. And it makes him amazing on fast, up-tempo tracks like this. This is my favorite chorus on the album. I think they're his best lyrics. The solo in here is very Blackmore-like.
Yes. I wrote that.
This is Blackmore-like.
Yep.
This
Rainbow, Blackmore.
We have to also say this. You saw the tour. I saw the tour. We've seen live stuff. And I will say this categorically. People, you have your own opinions. I thought Craig played the Rainbow material live much more authentically than Vivian Campbell did. I thought that Craig understood Richie's style. Not that he didn't copy, he wasn't, but he understood it more, that he was more in the vein of what Blackmore may have done than compared to when I heard Vivian Campbell play Rainbow material.
I'm looking at the song set. I actually have it to the left of me for the Sydney show, and he played "Long Live Rock and Roll" and "Man on the Silver Mountain" from Rainbow. And they also, I'll bring it in. He did a melody, "Heaven and Hell," the Black Sabbath song as well. So, look, it was a long time ago, but my recollection is he nailed it.
Yeah. Everything about this song, I love. They get to the final chorus. They get the punches from the band. Faces in the Window. Ba-da, boom.
Yeah.
boom, and then just drives, and they hold this beautiful Faces in the Wind with the harmony. Oh, and the band is just crushing. I would have loved this as an opener. This could have been great as an opener. It's also really refreshing where it is here. And here is where the keyboards are perfectly used. They've got that counter line during the chorus because you've got that driving guitar, and then you get this behind Ronnie's vocal with, oh man, I could listen to this. I could listen to this track all day, just repeat and repeat. And I absolutely love this track, and I've always thought it's one of the Dio solo era's best songs. So no, filler nowhere in the mix.
I think it's buried. They buried it in the wrong side, side 2, second last. And I have this problem with a lot of mid to late 80s metal albums where the best song or the most up-tempo or hard-hitting song is buried on side 2. So you've got the bean counters or the execs around the table. They look at the song listing. They put all the commercial hits very top heavy on side 1, right. But really good songs like this, they bury. So I would have put this on side 2. Maybe track 3, maybe even track 4, Pete.
Yeah.
Do you think it's in the wrong spot? Track listing? I think it is.
Yeah, it is. There is an argument to be made structurally that you put it at number 4 and you end side 1 with it, and All the Fools Sail Away is the closer, like Egypt.
Yes. Yep.
Or Shame on the Night. Structurally, that seems to be more consistent. But holy smokes, this track, I don't care as long as I can hear it. But I was really surprised because I figured by the time I got to this spot in the album, I was just going to get more of the kind of mid-tempo kind of, I don't want to say throwaways because there's not any throwaways on here. But I was just so shocked when this came in. I was like, where's this been? Man, I just absolutely love this track.
Yep. All right. So we finish off with When a Woman Cries. So to me, this has got a bit of a different sort of guitar tone from Craig Goldie. What do you think of this song?
Well, first of all, I didn't notice it at the time until I was listening to it this afternoon. The drum part that Vinny is playing that fades in is the same rhythm pattern that he uses when he's on the road with his brother Carmine, and the two of them start their drum duets. It's this rhythm. And I thought, there it is. That's what that was, because obviously I didn't know that they were going to do that way back in the 80s. But as soon as I heard it again, I thought, there it is. So if you go back and look at drum duets with Vinny and Carmine, this is the beat that they will use to start their exchange in their, quote, drum battles. It's a very, very different feel to open this versus everything else that's been on the record. I was listening to it today and something else kind of went in my head, and I apologize if this gets in yours or anybody else's head and you'll never be able to get it out. But all I could hear was dun 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 dun. It's a put on. And I hear Eminem's front over and over and over again, and I just couldn't get it out of my head. I didn't like the keyboards at all. The slides, they're cheesy, they're dated. Oh, I don't like them at all. Solid drumming. I thought this was the weakest composition of the album. The bridge is great. The solo section is really good. And then Vinny starts getting busier towards the end. And I'm gonna suggest this, and you've obviously made your point already, and you'll give me a affirmation of it. I thought one of the things that Dio struggled with, and this album is kind of a flagship of what it is, he never found that balance of keyboard usage with the rest of the band that Sabbath was able to do with Jeff Nichols. Jeff somehow was so perfect at knowing where to come in, what to add with the right kind of tone. I never hear a keyboard thing from Jeff and in a sound and go, oh, that's dated. It always worked. Throughout Sabbath's whole run with him, I always thought Dio never seemed to kind of get it right. I think he way overcompensated on Lock Up the Wolves with Johansson. That was a joke. You get this crazy pyrotechnic keyboard guy in a band so he can play chord notes. It was ridiculous. And Scott Warren, to me, looks bored on stage playing with his one hand playing single notes. He never got it right, in my opinion. And I think this is the song that I go back and say, okay, these keys just don't work here. You know, when a woman cries, ah, I'm like, oh, no, stop. So this is my least favorite. And I will say to the masses who have seen Dio a million times, you never had to be subjected to this because this is the only track that was never played live. So,
well, I disagree, but that's why I love having these shows, because I think Schnell brings it on. I love these little classical chords. It adds a lot of gravitas to the song, and yeah, I like the guitar tone. There's a bluesy riff over this thunderous beat. I don't mind this song at all. I don't think it's the best song, but look, Ronnie, I think, was always referencing Rainbow, the glory days of Rainbow, and Rainbow Rising with the wonderful keys of Tony Carey. And I think he had it in his head that he wanted to have a prototype of Black Sabbath and Rainbow, and Schnell was always more upfront keyboardist than Jeff, who was in, a sideman. I don't think Jeff ever played live on stage until the Tony Martin years. They finally, come round, put him on stage, and you actually saw what Jeff was doing.
Right.
So, but it's horses for courses if you like that sort of stuff. And I like the keys of Schnell, bar one song where I think it's a little bit dinky and dated. But I like his padding. I like the atmosphere, and he brings a little bit of classical finesse to this song. But
let me
we hear what we hear.
Let me propose a theory to you.
Yeah, sure.
Blackmore, obviously, was in purple and goes from purple to rainbow. While there are keyboards, absolutely, it is a diminished role for keyboards versus John Lord's. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Ronnie was in Rainbow. Ronnie goes solo. Now there is even a more diminished role of keyboards than in Rainbow. Would you agree with that as well?
Correct. Yes.
Each one of them along the way, if Richie had pulled out another keyboardist who approached or played anything similar to John Lord, he would have been pegged, well, it's just Deep Purple. What is he doing? What is he doing? You'd be pointing your finger going, what is he doing? Excuse me. If Ronnie does the same thing with Dio that the keys were doing in Rainbow, you'd say the same thing. Well, he just wants Rainbow. So they're kind of in a
Yeah,
nebulous.
yeah. It all goes in cycles, doesn't it? And yeah, I understand what you're saying. But anyway, that's the last track on the album. Pete, with 2024 ears, what do you think of this album and how it stands in respect to the Ronnie James Dio legacy, the catalogue? What do you think?
I'll stick just to his solo records. Of the 10, this is the one that I struggle with the most, feelings wise. Um, there are days when I listen to it, and certain things that I mentioned today probably don't bother me as much. There are days, like more recently, that you get me on a time where they are bothering me more. Um, I am in the process of giving ranking numbers to the catalog, so I don't have an actual number. But I do know that I have the actual albums in order, and this kind of sits dead square in the middle. Um, for me, um, it's got really strong moments, really amazing highs, some not really bad lows, but there are stumblings for me sonically here. The drums just don't sound very good for the most part. And that's hard to swallow for such a fan of Vinny, and knowing what Vinny's drums can sound like and what came out later, and the way his drums sounded on Strange Highways. And I'm like, oh my God, if those had been on Dream Evil, holy crap, it'd be a different record. And you say, well, it's the same songs. Well, they are, but they aren't.
Mm.
They are, but they aren't. How we hear something and the method in which it's delivered can have an impact. And maybe part of it is some snobbery on my part. So I will plead guilty that for the general masses, who are certainly not going to get as anally picky as I am, those may not be issues. And from that standpoint, the songs and the material puts it right square right in the middle. It's not going to be my best. It is certainly far from at the bottom of my list, because there are certainly albums that I care for less. So it's just going to forever kind of sit in the middle. Some days it'll float up to the upper half. Some days it'll just marginally go below the middle section. But every catalog has to have an album like that. And for me, it's this one.
Yep. Yeah, nice, Pete. I think it's in the top half for me. It's in the top runs of the catalogue. And the thing that gets me is I think I really gravitate to the emotion. And it's a snapshot at a particular time where Ronnie was quite vulnerable and there was a lot of adversity, a lot of things that were happening.
Right.
I love the raw emotion. I love where he's wearing his heart on the sleeve. Whether there's some sonic choices that I agree with or may irritate me, but I just think it's the Ronnie James Dio vocals and the songwriting that really get it over the line. Holy Diver and We Rock are my top two and always will remain so. So what falls below that is all interchangeable. But
sure,
I played this album a fair bit and I like it a lot, but it's more about the artistry of Ronnie. So,
well, I definitely pull out the live versions from Donington, which include Dream Evil, All the Fools, and Naked in the Rain.
Yep.
I listen to those a lot. And then I will pull out Faces in the Window, and I'll just pluck it out of the set list of the album, and I'll listen to it 2 or 3 times in a row and go, okay.
As we always do, Pete, to end the show, I like to do a little what if and go off on a little tangent, and I think it'd be a nice way to wrap up the show. So, a couple of questions. Do you think that the Vivian Campbell driven era of the band had reached the end of its artistic life in Sacred Heart? They probably didn't have another album in them artistically.
No, I don't think they were done. Um, I think this is a classic case where it's that second word, music business, where the business part of it became a much bigger obstacle than the instrumentation or the music part of it. We see now, all these years later, and before he passed, sadly, Vivian, Vinny, and Jimmy got along awesome. They loved playing together. They loved playing together. And they really enjoyed what each of them brought to the table. And I don't think for a minute artistically that they were done. I think all the other tenuous circumstances, especially with Vivian, made it impossible for him to continue, music notwithstanding. So no, I don't think that they were done, and would have loved to have seen where they have gone, to see if, because every band makes what they call maybe a course correction. Maybe Sacred Heart to them was, hey, it's a little too mainstreamy or whatever. Let's go back to what we were doing on Last in Line, and let's see what we've got and how is that album presented. And most likely they don't do intermission, so it comes out much closer in a time frame, and maybe we're talking something totally different, because this starts a snowball.
Yeah, but the anecdotal evidence of the projects that Vivian did after Dio was completely a different style of music. Like the project that he did with Lou Gramm, he was definitely going for more mainstream, and I'm just wondering whether he really grooved on this type of music. Deep down, did he really was his heart in this sort of music, or was it just like a young kid? And let's face it, he was much younger than the rest of the band.
Oh, yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, he was 18. It was like you apply for a job, it may not be the dream job, but you get the role, but it's not, deep down, this is not what I really want to do. I've got aspirations in a different genre. I've got aspirations of doing something different. I don't know. I'm not sure, I've run a ton of interviews, and I'm very conflicted because I always seem to oscillate between the Ronnie side and the Vivian side. It depends. I think some famous critic says there's two sides of the coin and they're both mine. But anyway.
Right. Well, there's a lot to unpack there. Pardon me, because sometimes you leave and just go into a total other direction because you need to change and go to another direction. Where did Bruce go right after Maiden? Halford went to different places at first. Adrian Smith went to different places before coming back to what you would call familiar territory. I think the bigger issue that I am taking from what has been going on over the last many years is that I think there were bigger battles between Ronnie and Wendy than there were between the band and Ronnie. I think from what I have felt is that Ronnie did have the best of intentions, the best of motives to include the band, to get them more money, to do this and do that. Wendy didn't care. She, after Rainbow especially, where he was left out on his own in the cold, and they're like, no, Ronnie can have anybody with him because he's Ronnie. Well, we know that's not true. We just know that's not true. And she dismissed the band, not unlike Sharon. And she dismissed them as being important. And they're like, well, you're certainly not more important than Ronnie, and I can replace you with anybody and we'll be great. So that to me is the bigger problem. You can say from a band you're going to blame Ronnie because he was the leader and he's the one who told you. But Ronnie defaulted a whole lot of stuff to Wendy and let her do it and let her run it. And
Mm,
so we don't know the full details of that, but to me that seems more the case. I still would thought you definitely had at least one more record. Where it went after that, I think it really depends. If it's all straightened out and they get their finances and the money and their comfort with each other straightened out, Vinny never acknowledged he was a guitar hero. It wasn't his thing. He just kind of he says, well, it's just kind of accidental. It was, yeah, whatever. I just played what I played, and you know, you all praised me afterwards with how brilliant I was, but I certainly wasn't thinking I was brilliant at the time, and I'm not sure I do
mm,
now.
yep.
And so he didn't embrace it from that standpoint. So him changing and becoming a supportive person in Leopard, where I'm sure they just put their arms around him after have to replace Steve. And hey, let's never minimize someone who opens the door and says, "Hey, welcome. Come on in. Feel at home. Put your feet on the furniture and let me get you something cold to drink."
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think I'm not sure I would have liked to have heard another album after Sacred Heart because I have a feeling it could have been cut from the same cloth because I think Sacred Heart was a bit saggy and a bit plodding and it seemed a little bit tired, even though live on that tour that we saw,
Mhm.
it was punchy and vibrant, albeit with Goldie playing the guitar. I would have liked the lineup to get together maybe 10 years later because there were a lot of members of the Dio family that left and came
Mhm.
back, including
Yes.
Goldie. So
Oh yeah.
I think it would have been nice if maybe they had a reunion maybe 10 years later and they're a little bit older, a little bit wiser, especially Vivian. He's a more mature guitarist and what he would have brought to the table in that sort of scenario. That's what I think would have been a better situation.
Yeah. And there were times you thought maybe around Strange Highways, well, I said, well, okay, well, here's a good time. Vinny's coming back. What's Vivian doing? They weren't in any place to work together. They were in no headspace to forgive each other. It would just have been disastrous.
Yeah.
And so by the time that got done, and the only thing that Ronnie ever suggested that he was interested in working on after The Devil You Know came out was to do the final two chapters of Magica, which I can promise you Vivian Campbell wanted nothing to do with it. And that was all Craig and Ronnie. So he
Mm.
was never going to do that. It was just a band that too many too many burned bridges, too many public statements, too many finger pointings, too much bad blood.
Yeah. Well, Pete, at least they're not pretending to be a family like a journey and all the poison and toxic
Right.
shenanigans of that band. At least, it is what it is. And they were honest enough to admit that we just can't be in the same room and
Right.
produce music. And not everything has to have a happy ending. So,
Nope. Nope.
c'est la vie, such is life.
That's right.
Pete, wonderful to have you on the show as always. This conversation
Pleasure.
has gone in so many different directions. Pete and I do an ongoing series of Deep Purple, and Ronnie is part of the family, so you could say this is another tree trunk connected to the Deep Purple family.
Right.
And it was wonderful talking to you on this album. You can see Pete on multiple shows on YouTube, including this show or the Contrarians. Just type in Pete Jones. And please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Don't forget, click the bell because we don't want you to miss any of the future shows that we're guest bagging about.
Right.
Tell us what you think about Dio, this album, and, you know, what you would have liked to have seen the Dio band do. But one thing's for sure, you'll see Pete Jones and I doing more shows in 2024. Cheers and have a good evening.